Hello, it's Media Center Ukraine, Odesa, and our second briefing will be about the Ukrainian counteroffensive and battle actions which are ongoing at the Russian-Ukrainian war front line. We are going to talk with British military expert Glen Grant, Lieutenant Colonel of British Army, retired and former advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Glen, hello, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
The first question I would like to discuss with you is the speed of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It's being widely discussed in Western media, in Ukrainian media. How appropriate, how do you think, is talking about the speed of the counteroffensive and what we will see in the nearest future, summer and autumn?
Well, I don't think you should talk about a counteroffensive like this in terms of speed or how quickly it goes. I think you've got to look at all the factors surrounding it. I know that the Western press were very strong about, we do all this training with everybody, and then with Western equipment and with Western training, suddenly the boys are going to get thrust through and drive all the way to Mariupol, and it hasn't happened. And to be blunt, it was never likely to happen. The only chance we had of doing that was before Christmas last year, when the Russians hadn't actually put any great trench works. But every week that we've left them, there's been a week that they've been able to lay down mines, dig trenches, and prepare people for the battle that is coming at the moment. So the boys have actually gone in to fight a seriously well-prepared enemy. And I don't think that we quite predicted anywhere in the West the sheer volume of mines that were laid. We've forgotten that, of course, the Soviet Union created millions and millions of mines for the Great War against the West, and now they've just laid them out. And so actually getting through these mines without actually having very much mine clearing equipment, and fighting into trenches without the required number of drones that they need, without without mortars, without grenade throwers, all the things that you need for trench clearing. No flamethrowers, for example. We don't have any flamethrowers on our side at all, and you badly need flamethrowers for things like trench clearing. So the soldiers are actually having a rough time of it. And they're moving forward slowly, but they are moving forward. In the south, they are progressing, and they're slowly wearing down the Russian side. And you have to look at the Russian side in that it's not just a coherent whole. There are areas where there are brigades that are very good, that have been fighting for a long time, coherently, and then there are areas where they're just literally reservists or mobilized people with no training who've come to the front line, and basically they're only fighting for their own survival. And the telephone calls back home from some of them tell a very sad story of soldiers on the front line without proper equipment, without food, without water often, and sometimes without ammunition. So it's quite possible that somewhere in the front line will break. But I'm not going to stand there and say that it will. But if it does, then the opening will be fleeting, and Ukraine has to get through that opening and drive behind the Russians as quickly as possible afterwards. Not just drive towards Melitopol, but actually get behind the frontline troops so that they fold, that they give in, and we take lots of prisoners and create a large opening. And this could happen any day. Equally, it could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or 5 weeks.
Thank you. It's very pleasant for me to hear how you say us, how we take much prisoners. And the question, which is a little bit connected with the counteroffensive, is the question about air superiority. A few weeks ago, BBC interviewed Taras Chmut from the Povernish Zhivym fund, and he said that none of the Western army would counteroffend will go forward without air superiority, without fighter jets and bombers over their heads. And you were actually the Her Majesty Army artillery officer. What do you think about it, about the crucial role of the air superiority in the conditions of Russian-Ukrainian war?
Air superiority is crucial, and if you haven't got air superiority, then it's a 20, 30 times harder job, and you're going to take a lot more casualties. I mean, what we need to perhaps do, which Ukraine has possibility to do, is to create more air superiority from drones, because it doesn't have to be a manned aircraft; it can be drones. But that means actually building more ourselves, and actually putting them up into the air to try and take domination of the air in a different way from manned aircraft or attack helicopters. But I think also there is this other point that I've made repeatedly, that if you spread everything out across the whole front line, like spreading the butter thinly, as we say, then you have no strength anywhere. And Ukraine does have aircraft, and Ukraine does have attack helicopters. And what this means is identifying very clearly where is the weakest point, and then focusing all the aircraft and all the attack helicopters very, very quickly, very short and sharp onto one area. So you actually create this breakthrough opportunity. If you don't try this coordination and you spread everything out, then it's a much, much harder game for everybody.
Thanks. I'll give the possibility to ask question to my colleague. Just introduce yourself into the mic and start with your question.
Hello, I'm Sacha Borrego from Mega TV Florida and Archipelago Manchester MCR. Hi, Mr. Lieutenant Glen Grant. I have 3 questions for you, so I will doing the 3 question in Spanish and English because our both is different channels. And my first question for you is, as you expertise an advisor from the Ukrainian government, what is the legal consequence will former British servicemen voluntarily have here when they return to United Kingdom? That is my first question.
That's a very good question. And to be perfectly honest, I do not have the slightest idea what the law is about someone volunteering, fighting and coming back. But I doubt that there is a law that stops them, because we've always been a mercenary country, Great Britain, as you know. So I'm quite sure that people going and fighting will not actually get any punishment for doing so on a country that Britain is supporting.
But do you remember Miss ex-British Pretel say when the voluntary coming and arriving again to United Kingdom, maybe they confront some legal consequence? That was my question, but thank you for your answer. My second question for you, as you ex-former military from United Kingdom, are you allowed by the government to serve in Ukrainian as an advisor?
I'm a civilian. Ex-military doesn't make it the slightest bit of difference. Once I leave the military, I'm a civilian. And as a civilian, I can do what I like, frankly, unless the law forbids it. And British law doesn't forbid me from going and advising anywhere.
Okay, thank you so much. And my third question and last one is, as a military with your big experience, what is your opinion about, in this moment, Ukrainian government? What is the vision of the talks taking place in Jeddah for an eventual peace agreement? Where is your opinion about this conversation between Zelensky and maybe the Russian government and in eventually peaceful agreement on this point?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any eventual about anything. Secondly, I think, to be blunt, it's a time-wasting activity. Because the only people that are going to deliver peace in any form is Russia, and the only way they're going to do that is either by losing or withdrawing. And at the moment, I don't see withdrawing as an option, which only leaves losing. So I think that, frankly, discussions about peace are premature, and that the country should, the government of Ukraine should concentrate on winning, not concentrate on anything else.
I totally agree with you. Thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you. I'll get back with mine. And if you don't mind, the questions of vulnerabilities of Ukrainian army are not being widely discussed due to some obvious reasons, surely. But I understand that you have the experience and the possibility to talk more freely about it, but quite cautiously, without doing any harm to Ukrainian military. So, what do you think about the vulnerability, of the Ukrainian army? What are the weak and the strong points of our armed forces?
Well, to start with the strong points, I mean, the Ukrainian army is probably the most intelligent in the world. I can't imagine that any army has got so many lawyers, PhD professors, and IT specialists fighting on the front line as Ukraine has at the moment. But the morale is high. We know this. Morale is high, but it's also, it's high, but it's fragile. When you take a lot of casualties, then morale can be knocked around a bit. Also, when the front line doesn't believe that it's being supported as well as it could be, either by its own government or by the West, then also those things are problematic. I think that the biggest area of weakness at the moment is that the Ukrainian government still doesn't take the war seriously. If it took it seriously, there would be a massive drive against corruption. There would be a massive drive against shifting money into fighting and away from, roads and parks and everything else where money is being wasted. And until we see corruption being properly weeded out, until we see the Russian-leaning people in the system, and there are still many, until we see them being weeded out and the money directed onto the front line, then that is the major weakness in Ukraine. And it's a worrying weakness because I just don't see that the government really understands that it is failing in this area. After the last question, rushing around and going and doing talks with people instead of actually spending those precious hours, they are precious. Every hour is precious during a war. Spending those precious hours concentrating on fighting. And, if you don't do that, then, you're creating massive vulnerabilities. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is still that that there isn't a strong enough coherence in the West to actually deliver what is needed. And I mean, part of that is the fault of the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine, that it has been jumping on big things all the time, like tanks and aircraft, while missing the fact that it's infantry that are winning this war, it's infantry that are fighting this war, and it's infantry that are going to take ground for you. And they are doing that at the moment. And it's infantry that have to be properly equipped before everything else. If your infantry is equipped, then the other things are good to have as well. But that I see as being a major weakness, that people just don't understand the needs of the infantry. And I think the fault of that lies still with some of the senior generals who are still thinking 1914, 1939 in their vision of fighting, and not thinking about modern war with drones and other technological systems.
Thank you. And the question which was sent to me by one of the journalists who is watching the conference online at the moment, he wrote me, recently one of the US medias, they were really grateful for that, but they didn't have any tactical training, any practical knowledge how to behave and how to how to behave in the combat. How do you think? Is it why does it happen? Why did it happen from your point of view?
I think there's several things about this. First of all, that I don't think that many of the Western defense ministries have actually grasped the need of what is required for the front line, and so that's reflected in the training that comes into. I have to say that I don't believe that the British government, that the British Army, has failed in this way, because they've actually spent a lot of time trying to work out exactly what should be done. But there is a problem in our own armies that we automatically think that, you know, when people get to a certain rank, that they understand everything and that they know what to do, and that of course isn't true, and they don't. And sometimes they need a much better briefing and a much better a direction about what to do. I also lay the blame for this slightly on the senior military staff in Ukraine. Not enough generals travelled and went and actually watched and talked and discussed what was going on with their soldiers. And in these cases, you know, when a brigade is training, the brigade commander must be there, and the brigade commander must be the prime link with the person in charge of the training, so that there is absolutely no chance of a mistake happening in these things. Some of the generals have just ignored this training in other countries. They haven't gone, they haven't acquainted themselves with it, and they haven't actually made sure that it's the right thing for them, for their soldiers, for their front line. And that was a major mistake. The West does understand it's made a mistake in some areas, and there is discussion about this now in America. I just hope that for in future, that the quality of training of soldiers, especially the tactical training, will improve. But there are problems with it still.
The next question is about the strategy we were seeing during last weeks, maybe even last month, when the Ukrainian army using British missiles, and now I suppose even French, and will be using German far-range missiles, hitting the bridges between Crimea and the mainland, hitting the bridge between Crimea and Russia?
The first thing is Crimea. I mean, I think that what the Ukrainian army is doing with Crimea is wonderful. Crimea needs to be isolated. Russia is only going to sweat when it can't deliver food and things to Crimea except by ship, and then they're worried about Ukrainian drones coming round and actually attacking the ship when it's doing things. So we need to try and isolate Crimea from everything. And that will, of course, also isolate part of the supply route that into the south towards Zaporizhzhia. I have one problem area in my mind, which is that you know, if you attack, for example, ammunition dumps that are far back, you are affecting the front line in a way, but you're not affecting the front line directly. And I think that my view is that there needs to be much more attacking close to the front line to try and actually to destroy the infrastructure that supports soldiers in the front, because you've still got an infantry battle that's got to take place. And if you destroy ammunition at the back, it may slow it down, but it doesn't mean to say it's going to break it. If you destroy it close to the front line, then it breaks it. And it means that the soldiers in the front line suddenly get nothing. They're suddenly in a real problem area that immediately behind them, the headquarters behind them, the ammunition behind them is just gone. There is no time for Russia to resupply it. And this has always been a problem with railway lines. If you look at the Second World War, railway lines were destroyed time and time again, and they were repaired within hours. And so we have this problem as well. If we destroy railway lines, Russia is quite capable of repairing them quickly. So using long-range weapons has got to be done with care, and it's got to be coordinated with the front line to to create this overwhelming effect of attack on one area of the front line so that it becomes weak.
Thank you. You mentioned drones before when we were talking about the air superiority, and you mentioned hitting the warship with unmanned sea drones. How do you think we got used a little bit for the aerial UAVs, but the sea UAVs, especially the ones which are being used as a, I don't know, as an artillery shell, as a missile, how do you think it changed the balance of powers in the Black Sea? And is it possible for Ukraine, and you know we don't have very powerful navy at sea, is it possible for Ukraine to use these unmanned devices to change the balance to our good?
Oh, completely. And the more of them, the better. And it must be possible now to make some that are even sharper and nastier. I mean, we've actually done the first part, and that's been successful. We see they can be successful. Now, whoever is making those must be encouraged to put more powerful engines in so they go faster, and to create a even larger weapon to make the Russian ships fear going out on the front line totally.
Mm-hmm. And the last question, I think it will be the last question. What do you think about Russian actions? We saw their advance in spring a year ago, and in April when they left the Kiev region, it was even a feeling that they actually lost. They couldn't achieve their main objective to make Ukraine a satellite state of the Russian Federation. And we had the feeling that Russia actually lost. But later, as you said earlier, they created this line of defense in Zaporizhia and Kherson region, and they want to, as I understand, they want to guard their secondary task, which was achieved, this ground-land corridor to Crimean Peninsula. Now, how do you think, what will be their actions, what they are trying to do? Are they going to advance, or is their only task now is to hold what they've already occupied?
Now, I think you have to be clear that Russia is in this for a long game. They're already gearing up defense industry. They are creating wider relationships with other countries to try and get more equipment. Including, I hear, from India. So they're not about to give in. They will push forward wherever they can push forward, and they'll defend wherever they need to defend. But their aim with all this is to keep what they've got for as long as possible until the West actually gives in. I hate to say this to be pour cold water on their ambitions, but the West is also gearing up its ammunition plants and its ability to fight this. So this is not going to be to Russia's advantage.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for this briefing. Hope to see you again. Maybe if you visit Odesa, we will be very glad to see you, to welcome you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and glory to heroes.
Thank you. That was Glen Grant, retired Lieutenant Colonel of the UK Armed Forces and former advisor to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense. Our next briefing will be in half an hour. Stay with us.